Sorry, I lost my place. From the National Historic Register. He is trying to emulate the many excellent tour guides he has followed through neighborhoods in St. Louis and other cities in the US and other countries, as we learn the background, history, and exciting new developments of the St. Louis Cultural District. Please welcome Gary Ratkin. Thank you, Gary. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and start sharing the screen here with, there we go. So you should be able to see my first slide.
Yes, I do.
I'm really happy to talk with you this morning about Grand Center. This is an area that, as you just heard, I became more interested in than a casual attendee at the Symphony or the Fox or one of the many museums in the area. As a tour guide in 2012, and I've been pleased to lead tours through 2 different agencies, and I keep learning more and more about the area. Even since the COVID pandemic, there have been so many new developments that I want to highlight today. So you will see on my slide here 3 stars. These are 3 either recently opened or new ventures in Grand Center that you may not know much about, and I hope to teach you. But we're going to talk about 255 years of history, 140 years of modern architectural history, the theaters that are in the area, the galleries, museums, schools and universities. Unfortunately, we won't talk too much about the bars and restaurants because
Something happened.
There, that seemed to be better. Okay, so we're going to talk about the area of St. Louis that is bounded on the east by Compton, the north by Bell and the VA Hospital, the west by Vanderveer, and the south by Lyndall and St. Louis University. Unfortunately, we won't have time to talk about the many outstanding things that St. Louis University has contributed to the area. That's another talk by somebody else. So let's move ahead here. This is intended to be an armchair tour, but we're going to really do it as a walking tour, as I would do as a walking tour. There will be several themes of my talk, including the residential development of the area, the influence of transportation, medical and commercial institutions, the pivotal role of churches and fraternal organizations, the cultural venues that have now emerged as the anchors for the neighborhood. But we'll also talk about architectural treasures and success stories from the past and the more recent exciting restorations and innovative developments. I want to point out to you the work of the Kranzberg Arts Foundation in developing many of the recent programs. And I mention it because their website is an excellent place to learn about various performances that are going on in the Grand Center neighborhood. And so this slide was taken from one of their recent weekly newsletters, and that can be found at Kranzberg Arts Foundation. I believe that is .org, KranzbergArtFoundation.org. Now let's start with a little bit of history. St. Louis was founded in 1764, and within 6 years of its founding, common fields began to be laid out by the city structure that existed. The common fields were, for the most part, outside the city limits. And this is a stylized diagram of what a common field layout would be. The road that is depicted here in the middle is surrounded by black dots that are houses or businesses. And then these narrow strips of land using the French seigneurial land system are laid out so that they can be farmed with teams of oxen. The idea of having the homes and businesses on one street instead of the patchwork of farms as we're more used to in recent years in this country, this system, this French system, was designed as a defense line against Native Americans who sometimes in our area were hostile to the incursions by settlers in our area. That street that I mentioned was Grand Avenue. That was the ridge line, and the oxen, the team of oxen, would plow to the west as far as Kings Highway before turning around. Now, as St. Louis grew and settlements came away from the city to try to escape even the early congestion and pollution that had occurred down on the riverfront, the area around Grand and Lindell was being developed as the future home of St. Louis University. And this area was known as Lindell Grove, as this, my pointer can hopefully show you. The city limits by the 1860s had been extended just past Grand, as you can see. And with the tensions that arose over slavery and states' rights in the early 60s, 1860s, the then governor, Claiborne Jackson, raised a militia, the Missouri Volunteer Militia, to gather at Lindell's Grove and really was to take over St. Louis once they had gotten enough munitions and heavy arms smuggled into them. The Union Army under Captain Nathaniel Lyon, stationed in St. Louis, also got an even larger army of 6,000 men, mostly German immigrants, and they surrounded this secessionist group here and marched them down Olive Street to the downtown area, where riots broke out over the next 2 days. These riots resulted in 28 civilian deaths, 75 wounded, and ended the secessionist threat. The governor fled his office and joined other Confederate sympathizers in Western and Southern Missouri, and other battles went on there, but St. Louis remained in Union hands, as we know. Further development of the St. Louis area accelerated by not only the steamboat traffic, but the opening of the Eads Bridge in 1876 shows on this drawing, which is a Compton and dry drawing of downtown, how congested things had become. And this picture from the levee shows you the air pollution that was being created not only by the steamboats, but the early coal burning factories and wood burning buildings here and along the downtown area. People began to look for ways to escape with better housing away from the downtown area. And as I mentioned, even some of the universities, such as St. Louis University, began to look to move to Grand and Lindell. Housing west of downtown at Lucas Place was one of the first really high-class subdivisions, but that was just west of Tucker, just west of the current St. Louis, downtown St. Louis Public Library. The luxury housing that was developed on Grand was Vandeventer Place. Vandeventer Place extended from Grand to Vandeventer, and then on the north from Bell, which is just to the north of the current VA hospital, and to the south on Delmar. So a long, narrow, single street of mansions that you can see here. These gates are still in existence, and after the homes were all torn down, the gates were moved to Forest Park. And they really are quite beautiful. Let's just take a quick look at some of the homes that first graced Vandeventer Place and were some of the most magnificent homes in what is now Grand Center. These homes housed people such as wealthy businessmen, lawyers, the mayor of St. Louis. Presidents came to visit the mayor in homes such as these. Two homes are notable. They were designed for the Lionberger family that we'll hear about, but they're notable because their architect was Henry H. Richardson, H.H. Richardson, who was known for his work in Boston and Chicago. And we'll see his Lionberger house that still exists in Grand Center today. Vandeventer Place didn't last very long, however, because within 20 years of its development, people began to move away to other homes in the Central West End and at Westmoreland Place because of the railroad traffic on Vandeventer and nearby, and the trolley lines that were going, and the streetcar lines that were going up and down Grand. So this is Grand Center in 1875. Here's a drawing of Vandeventer Place. There were other homes, mostly farms. And you can begin to see the businesses that grew up in this area. One of the still existing buildings was right in the area just to the east of Grand. And this, we'll see later, was an 1874 house built that is now called the City House. Well, let's start our tour. And we're going to begin at the western edge of Automobile Row. By the beginning of the 20th century, automobiles became a growing St. Louis concern. Many assembly plants, parts plants, and showrooms existed on Locust Avenue. And this building, built in 1919 for the Cadillac Agency, was probably the most elaborate, beautiful Automobile Row building. It exists today. It's been extensively redone in the last few years by the Kranzberg Art Foundation, who has their offices in here, has a performance space, Sophie's Lounge, and there's a restaurant, Turn, that is on the first floor. So if you look at the Dot-Zack today, where we start our walking tour traditionally and then begin to go east on Locust, it looks very much as it did in 1919 with some better lighting. I do want to point out this sculpture here. This is Emmy. This is down the street and represents one of the many street sculptures that exist in Grand Center since its redevelopment. Here is another one at the end of the block that anchors the now closed Ignacio Hotel and extends down to the Moto Museum. The Triumph Grill is here in the middle of the block. The International Photography Hall of Fame is upstairs from the hotel area. The Ignacio did house a sushi lounge that is also closed currently. I would commend to your attention, if you haven't visited the International Photography Hall of Fame, it is really quite an excellent photography museum and has changing exhibits on a regular basis. The Moto Museum itself is interesting and includes the private collection of Steve Smith, the co-founder and CEO of the Lawrence Group. You're going to hear more about Steve Smith as through our tour, because not only does he own these motorcycles and created this museum, but he's redesigned many of the notable buildings in Grand Center that we will highlight in the tour. Some other buildings nearby include the PW Shoe Loft and the Flying Cow. I'm only showing you the sign. It's a yogurt shop that was popular in the area. This was a block off of Olive. And if we look down Olive from the Moto Museum area, we see this white building. And if you've been there in the last year, you have seen the new four-part artwork, the mural designed by the artist Finch, F-N-N-C-H, that's his name. It is on the Centene Center for the Arts building. And I want to show you the four different parts, or to explain to you what they are. In the upper left hand, top left hand, is the violin bear for the performing arts scene in Grand Center. The fancy bear with the top hat is in the top right, depicting the Gilded Age of St. Louis, the Gilded Age, 1870s up to 1920s. The Blues Bear is over here, celebrating the 2019 Stanley Cup Championship. And then here in the lower right is the Artist Bear. And not only do I have the Artist Bear depicted here, but I have the arts card because the Arts and Education Council is headquartered in this building. The building itself was erected in 1889 as Jacob Mahler's dance studio. In 1907, it was redesigned for the first time. For the Knights of Columbus, it became a Masonic Medina temple, and then was redesigned again in 2006 for Centene Center, and houses 24 art organizations, some gallery space, a small performance space, and is a really excellent reuse of this classic 1890s building. The bottom two panels show the 1908 Metropolitan Building, which is at the corner of Olive and Grand. Olive and Grand was the busiest street corner with multiple streetcar lines and eventually bus lines crossing each other. There was a train station nearby that had a suburban type of railroad that went as far north as Florissant. And so this was a very busy area. And by 1908, this high-rise office building was built for mostly for medical practices. The building eventually became totally vacant and derelict and was without a tenant for over 20 years. In 2012, it was remodeled as the Metropolitan Art Lofts, and it provides 73 subsidized apartments and collaborative workspace. So to get an apartment here, you need to have a resume showing you that you have been an accomplished artist, and the environment is to try to foster collaboration between artists of different types, printmakers and pottery makers, for example. And so there's been a great deal of very innovative work that has come out of here. This is one of the apartments that I was able to see when the building first opened for tenants, and it is fully occupied and has been since it opened. So we're at the corner of Grand and Olive, and many of you will recognize it because of this building. And we call it Woolworths. Anyone who's been around St. Louis for a long period of time can maybe even remember it being Woolworths. But let's look at it here. This is the building. As you can see, it has a lease sign on it. This is the Metropolitan building over here. This is what the building used to look like. This is the Beers Hotel that was on this location, Metropolitan building across the street, much as it looks today. But the Beers Hotel was a so-called luxury hotel. And it had housing that we know for the AMA convention in 1922, a room went for $2 to $3 a night. That included a bathroom in the room suite. This is a postcard view, and you can see many of the other buildings that have been torn down on both sides of the street here. The building that we came to know as Woolworths was built after the Beers Hotel burned, and by early 1920s, this building was being built for Rexall Drugs. It was one of the first. You can see the Fox was down the street. So this is the late 1920s. By the time the Fox opens, you can see the University Club further down that we'll mention later. Woolworths took the building over and added another floor, added escalators, and a lunchroom. The lunchroom counters were the scene of sit-ins in the early 1950s, making St. Louis one decade earlier than the famous sit-ins, civil rights sit-ins that occurred in Greensboro, North Carolina. Ours were mostly settled by the end of the 1950s. What was once the site of human rights protests now promotes nurturing relationships amongst people because the building has been transformed into the Big Brothers, Big Sisters building. The Kranzberg Art Foundation has a gallery in the lower level that you can see here. Sorry. And there is a rooftop bar and space that is open for groups and meetings. This is a new test kitchen and rooftop. And this is really a very beautiful space that has been added in recent years to the building, now known as Big Brothers, Big Sisters. If we go down the street, we're walking down Olive now, and we immediately to this building, the Continental Life building, which is the tallest at 23 stories in Grand Center. It is an icon of Grand Center. It is an Art Deco building. And if you look at this elevator lobby, you see this extensive Art Deco design and this register. This register is, I depict for you because it shows, and you may not be able to see it on this picture, but it shows the tenants that occupied the building. These were mostly national and regional offices of General Motors, DeSoto, McGraw-Hill, David O. Selznick Studios, and it goes on. The man who developed the building, Edmund Mays, lived in a penthouse shown at the bottom and to the right side. And this 2-floor penthouse was really quite elaborate. He also owned the Grand National Bank. And in the process of moving the bank from its location here on Grand Avenue near the Fox, the bank sustained the largest bank robbery in the United States at that time. Over $1 million was stolen. And this resulted in a run on the bank. So this was not a Depression era run on the bank because of the failure of the banking system. It was because people learned from the newspaper about the robbery at the Grand National Bank. It turns out it was probably an inside job that the moving process, they had taken the door off the vault and moved it to the new building. Before they moved the money, the guard who was supposed to be guarding it was told he could go home early, and the robbers came in, did their work, and left. This bank housed the first bank drive-up window in the alley in 1929. So the Continental Building eventually became strictly offices. The bank was gone, and then it remained vacant for 30 years. It was reopened in 2002 as market rate housing, a range of houses from efficiency apartments to loft space to 3 penthouses and a limited amount of office space. The VA has had clinics in one of the parts of the first floor. Steve Crampy of Crampy and Owen, who redeveloped this space in 2002, wrote a book about the Continental Building called The Queen of Lace. And some of these photographs are taken from that book. Let's move further down the street. We've come now to the Public Media Commons. This is the space between the Channel 9 network KETC to the west and KWMU, St. Louis Public Radio, NPR to the right side if you're standing in the Commons, or to the east. The first building was KETC and is not only notable for the public television station, but it houses and produces a large amount of video for commercial enterprises in the St. Louis area. This building on the bottom part, KWMU, was built in 2012. The architect is Sung Ho Kim and Heather Woofter of Axiom. It not only houses the broadcast studios, some performance space that's used by notables such as the Ariana String Quartet, but also classroom space for nurses from UMSL who work at the nearby VA hospital. The public media commons is envisioned not only as a space to walk through, the artist walk, and it goes back here to this opening between the buildings. This big video screen is on the back wall of the Sheldon. So the Sheldon faces Washington Avenue. This is the back wall, and there's an amphitheater that you can't see in this picture to the right here. Let's look at the Sheldon. We now have come around on Washington, where we first come to this grow wall, which is the newest addition. It's a 208-foot long vertical grow wall or garden that was recently completed and planted. It was planted with native Missouri vines. The landscape architects and designers came from the Missouri Botanical Garden, as well as Benjamin Gilmartin, who worked in New York and at Lincoln Center and the Museum of Modern Art in New York. The Sheldon Concert Hall is a building that was built in 1912. The architect was Louis Spearing. He had some note, having worked in the 1904 World's Fair and even in the Chicago World's Fair before that. He built an auditorium that many of us know today for the wonderful performances that are still going on there or have been recently going on. It was built for the Ethical Society. Walter Sheldon was the founder, and therefore the name, the Sheldon Concert Hall. It housed not only their ongoing educational and religious services, but famous speakers who presented in this space included Margaret Sanger, Thurgood Marshall, Dwight Eisenhower, Buckminster Fuller, Albert Einstein, and Margaret Mead. New windows were added in the remodeling in 2001. Stained glass windows by Rodney Winfield have added to this auditorium. And there's an upper level space as well for meetings and dinners. And some, I've even attended some performances up there. This photo here shows you the Sheldon art galleries, or galleries that are built to the west of the building and have really excellent art, photography, and remarkable student pieces. So that is worth a trip. And the art galleries are open now for limited hours, and check their website. You can see the stained glass windows, by the way, in this lower picture. Well, let's keep moving to the west. We've turned away from the Sheldon. We're going west on Washington Avenue, and we come to two buildings that have been designed by two stars of modern architecture. The first building we come to is the Pulitzer Arts Foundation, designed by Tadeo Ando. Ando is notable for having won the Pritzker Prize in 1995. This is a typical Ando building. It is a perfect concrete building. It's poured concrete. No flaws were allowed. There is almost nothing open to the outdoors. There's no windows to speak of. It's just a magnificent space. There is a reflecting pool that I did not show you, but I did want to show you one side of the building with the narrow windows and this piece of sculpture by Richard Serra named Joe. This occupies the space between the Pulitzer and its neighbor to the west, the Contemporary Arts Museum. The Contemporary Arts Museum was done by a younger architect, Brad Clopeful, from the Forum for Contemporary. It was designed for the Forum for Contemporary Art. It has been renamed as the Contemporary Art Museums and was developed about a year after the Pulitzer opened. And so this space in here is really a beautiful courtyard, and certainly both facilities are worth visiting and are open now. Again, check their websites. You can see a better picture of the Pulitzer down here in the lower right. I have to point out that the Contemporary Art Museum, although again a concrete building, has many flaws and many open areas. There are big windows that face Washington Avenue and also face Spring to the west. Across the street from the Pulitzer Arts Foundation is a new park, just opened in the last few months. It has some short walking trails. It is beautifully planned and developed by the Pulitzer Arts Foundation. They took down the building, the industrial building that was on that space, and have developed that along with a new development yet to come. Around the corner on Spring is the Burnt Church. That's what it's currently called. It's been owned by Grand Center. They've lit the area. The Pulitzer Arts Foundation is taking it over and is developing it and stabilizing the building further. And hopefully that will be open for further enjoyment in the near future. The church itself dates back to 1884. It was built for the Garrison Avenue Baptist Church. It was a Gothic revival style. It later became a Swedenborgian congregation that still exists in Baldwin. It became several other iterations. It was destroyed by fire in 2001. And so it still looks very much the same as it did after the fire if you drive by today. Between Park-like, the park that we talked about on Washington, and the Spring to the west, there are three houses that are in this top row of photographs. The Wetzel House is an 1880 development that was built for that family in Second Empire design. It really shows you what some of the upper class housing looked like. The Judson House to the right, it came later. It was built for Frederick Judson, who was a notable attorney and legal intellectual who defended labor unions, was on the National War Labor Board in World War I, and was involved in the development of the League of Nations. This has now been redeveloped by the current occupants of the residence. They have been able to get listing on the National Historic Register, and they do have some music performances that they house in their space. In between is a luxury apartment house for wealthy professional bachelors. It's called the Pendennis Club, as it was named for the ultimate literary bachelor, Major Arthur Pendennis, from a William Thackeray novel. So that's in between these two. Most of the tenants who moved into the Pendennis Club came from the University Club building down the street. The University Club had hotel space, and some of their tenants wanted more long-term residence. And as long as they were bachelors, they could live at the Pendennis Club. Down at the lower left-hand side is the Lionberger House I made reference to earlier. This was built in 1886 for one of the Lionberger's sons. The building was designed by H.H. Richardson, although it really doesn't look typical of many of the Richardson buildings that we know of from Chicago and Boston. Richardson was eventually Assistant Attorney General of the United States, and after living there from 1886, they moved west in 1907 to Westmoreland Place. The building has undergone a more recent renovation by the current owner, Rodemeyer Crystal, a real estate management firm that has tried to maintain it. It actually originally was built with only 2 of these bays, with a third one to the west added. And if you go and look carefully at the building, you can see the difference in the brickwork. There's a bed and breakfast down at the end in an Italianate building, end of the street, and that's the old Meriwether Mansion. Now, if we're now at the Lionberger House, and we're going to turn to the east, to our left, and we come to the Grandel Theater. That's its newest name. It was originally the first Congregational church, built in 1884 in Romanesque revival style. This looks like H.H. Richardson's construction, although Louis Frederick Rice was the architect and not Richardson. Richardson died, by the way, while the Lionberger House that we were talking about was being built. The Grandel Theater building is Richardsonian because of its clustered windows, the monumental arches that you can see here, and the large blocks of exterior stone that made up the building that we don't see in the house at all. Some close-ups of the building as it is today. It was renovated twice in recent years, 1989 for the Black Rep, where they created a 450-seat auditorium. And after they moved out in recent years, the Kranzberg Arts Foundation has taken possession of the building and extensively remodeled the theater, as well as the dining space in the lobby, and added multiple sculptures. This is Herb Alpert by the musician and sculptor, Herb Alpert. This just shows you the range of some of the shows that were going on at the Grandel, but the Grandel is not shut. They have performances even now in recent weeks in a tent that has been put up in the lot that faces Brandon. This is another sculpture that is still at the Grandel building, and it's facing the school across the street. Looking down to the west is the old Urban League building, now the Vaughn Cultural Center. So there's a lot going on at the corner of Grandel and Grand. I'm sorry. Trying to get back to this. There we go. And well, I'm going to try to get this fixed later and try to move ahead. Okay, we're just going to have to use this smaller view for some reason. Okay, so let's try to move ahead here. This is a view of Grandel looking to the Sun Theater, the old Sun Theater, as you can see in this slide. Was a burlesque house. It was originally developed for German language vaudeville. And it quickly, after the development of World War I, devolved from its original intention to a variety of burlesque houses. And the Sun being the name of one of the burlesque houses. It eventually became a derelict building and looked like this when the renovations began many years later. This is now the home of the Grand Center Arts Academy performing space. And this is what this auditorium looks like today. The details of the building are shown here. These were falling apart, were falling into the street, and much of the street was blocked off. This is what the building looks like today. If you look behind the Sun Theater or the Grand Center Arts Academy, you see Sweetie Pies, which occupies a long row and is a notable restaurant and cultural icon in the area. It has, it was founded in the 1960s and moved in later years to this location. It, the person who founded it was Robbie Montgomery, who was one of the backup singers for the Ike and Tina Turner show. And it has had a national presence on Oprah Winfrey's. If you look to the west here, this is Cardinal Ritter College Prep at the end of the block and is an example of one of the new schools that has moved into the area. An example of some of the housing that still exists in the area. And across the street from the Grand Center Arts Academy, is the St. Louis Theater building, which it became Powell Hall. It was a modern movie palace. It was built in 1925 using Chicago architects C.W. and George Rapp. It was the largest theater at its time with 4,500 seats. And then it really fell out of favor. The symphony moved back in 1967 after being in several downtown locations. The symphony, I should point out, is the second oldest professional symphony orchestra in the United States. And it had begun on Grand Avenue in a building that no longer exists, the Odeon, further north on Grand. This was remodeled in the late 1960s, as we see, and the original architecture was preserved. It is a modified French Baroque style with a monumental 3-story front window that you can see here, with a stained glass image of King Louis IX. The Missouri Theater is in the next block on Grand to the south. This is the Missouri Theater office building, as we know it. The Missouri Theater was in a separate building behind and was notable because it was the home of the Missouri Rocket Girls that today we know as the Radio City Music Hall Rockettes. The theater building was torn down. The old theater is now just a parking lot, but the building has been restored after many years of disuse. One time the St. Louis Health Department was in the first floor area, and it now houses a really exciting hotel that we're going to talk about in just a minute. The Third Baptist Church is at the end of the corner and is really a pillar of the community. It was built in 1884 in Gothic style. It was rebuilt and expanded after a fire in 1928. It was expanded along Washington Avenue. And its current facade is a modern 50s design, almost a movie theater. And here is the main sanctuary that looks very modern and has a Gothic chancel, however, and both Byzantine and Corinthian features. They made a decision during the time period that Grand Center was really going downhill. They made a decision to stay in this area. They became a pillar of the Grand Center neighborhood and have really been extremely important in providing education, religious services, and community programming. Let's go back to the Missouri Theater building. It is now the Angad Arts Hotel. This is a project of Steve Smith of the Lawrence Group. The entire building, except for the ground floor, is given over to the hotel. The lobby is on the 12th floor. This is the lobby here in the upper left-hand panel. There's artwork throughout. And this is the reception area on the first floor. This large video installation is curated and changed frequently through the year. It's a notable place to visit, and I strongly recommend that you look this up and take a tour or stay the night. This is an interior view going from the lobby up to the lounge area, the bar area. There's a library here to the left. Here's what the lounge looks like on the top floor. And one of the rooms, this is a blue room. There are 4 different color motifs and different layouts depending on the size of the rooms or the suites. And some of the suites are really quite notable and worth considering to rent out as a party space. If we leave the area of the Angate Arts Hotel, Missouri Theater, and go down to Washington and Grand, we come to the area that we know today as Strauss Park. It's this triangular layout of park space, a row of buildings that's over here. To the south, it faces the Fox, and there's restaurant space, jazz at the bistro, all in this line of buildings. Here's another view of Strauss Park. KDHX radio is at one end of the park area. This outdoor sculpture is the old sign from the Sun Theater that's been repurposed and put on their wall. This is the first building you come to after KDHX moving down the street. This building right here is the Wainwright City House. It was built in 1874. I made reference to it early on. This building was occupied by Ellis Wainwright, who invited his architect, Louis Sullivan, and his associate, Frank Lloyd Wright, to this house to discuss the design for his office building, now known as the Wainwright Building downtown. So we know that Frank Lloyd Wright had dinner here, but we don't think he had anything to do with the architecture, either at this building, which was after his time, or the downtown buildings. The view to the south shows this line of building where Jazz at the Bistro is now known as the Harold and Dorothy Stewart Center for Jazz. Wynton Marsalis stated that this was one of the 10 best places to hear live jazz in the United States. And this was even before it was redesigned and upgraded in the last few years. It houses not only Jazz at the Bistro, named the Faring Jazz Bistro, but it has a jazz lounge, which is Nancy's jazz lounge, Nancy Kranzberg's contribution here. Leon Strauss is the person responsible for developing the group that redid the Fox Theater. And here's the Fox as we know it today. The Fox Associates own the building next door, the older building at the corner of Washington and Grand. It's the Humboldt building. This is where their business headquarters are located. And the Fox itself was replaced a mansion and a church that used to exist on this space. It was built in 1929 by William Fox of 20th Century Fox fame. Howard Crane was the architect. He was well known for designing many different architectural buildings of note in the United States, mostly theaters. We head east on Washington. We come to Circus Flora, part of the Kranzberg organization today. This has been there for present for over 30 years in St. Louis. This building that most people never pay any attention to was the former Barnard Free Skin and Cancer Hospital. It moved to the Washington University Medical Campus in the 1950s and was the site of many early innovations in radiation therapy, radioisotope therapy after World War II. This is Hilo, one of the Kranzberg's recent innovations, a commercial building that has been redone into a literary cafe, gallery, and performance space. This is further down Washington Avenue. And just past the Hilo is the Urban Chestnut, the Barnett on Washington. Bulrush on St. Louis is in the same block with the Hilo, and the Marcel is right around the corner, a Kranzberg theater that has been developed in recent years. Finally, Grand Center continues redeveloping. I would point out to you this space. It's now open space, but it's being redeveloped. It's the block of Olive to Vandevetter. I'm sorry, Olive to Spring to Vandevetter. And the buildings have been torn down. This building has been saved. It's the old Henry Wolfner Library from 1898. It is going to be a clubhouse for this residential development of 27 single-family homes and a 35-unit apartment house in this block that is currently under construction. Across the street from the Hilo is an industrial building that is being considered by Steve Smith for a concert venue similar to the pageant in University City. And coming in this year, down the block from the Hilo is a new location for Miss Sophie's Lounge. And there's a lot going on in Grand Center. Check out the websites for the Contemporary Art Museum, the Angatz Arts Hotel, the Pulitzer. There are actual dinner shows that go on in Grand Center, even today in a tent, as I've mentioned. And this is a shot from the roof of the Angatz Arts Hotel facing downtown. And I think really shows you a side of St. Louis that you probably haven't seen before. So with that, I would stop for any questions. I'm sorry for the technical problem that I had here.
Gary, we had an earlier comment and question from Bill Livingston.
Yeah.
Can everyone hear me?
I hear you.
Okay. What is the tower with the colored lights on the top of the Continental Life building? And is there a significance to the color sequence of the flashing lights?
I don't think there's a significance for the lights as they were as they are done now. But originally there was a tower at the top of that Continental Life building that was there to tie up dirigibles. So you could take your blimp and travel to St. Louis and tie up there and somehow get down to the roof of the Continental building. And so there was a big beacon that was up there and that whole area was lit up. Well, I don't think much came of it.
Off of my Zoom meeting.
There's not much that I can say exists that was original. I think even the beacon has been removed, but when they redeveloped it for apartment buildings.
So the next, Sandra Shapiro, she says, I remember a Caravellas restaurant off of Grand? Any info?
Garavelli's. I've been there. Garavelli's was one of the several restaurants. It was part of a small chain, a St. Louis chain, and it was on Olive just west. It's in the area where that large parking lot exists today for um, the that people use to park in the when they're going to the Fox or to the Kranzberg uh, small theaters that are in the Big Brothers Big Sisters building.
Lee Brav has a question. Did the 1930 run on Grand National Bank ruin it? And because she's never heard of it.
The Grand National Bank was in the process of moving. So the run was on the old building. It was, I think, a one-day affair. I don't know really whether people lost money or not. I know that Mays, the owner of the bank and the owner of the Continental building, he eventually was suspected of fraud and possibly having a role in the bank robbery, in the inside job, and left the country. And I don't think ever came back. He fled. And so he was never prosecuted. But the Grand National Bank did move to the Continental building, and it was in the lobby of that building for many years before it went out of business.
Then Sandra Shapiro has another question. Where is the sculpture that you pointed to, the black figure in the water?
The black figure in the water, was that? I remember there's two figures that I think I highlighted. One was the trumpeter that Herb Alpert did, and that is on the side of the Grandel Theater. And then the other picture the other sculpture that I mentioned is the Nijinsky Hare, H-A-R-E, which faces from the Grandel Theater towards the Grand Center Arts Academy across Grandel. I think those are the two that I mentioned. I'm trying to recall if there was any other.
Sandra, she's raising her hand. Sandra, do you want to unmute yourself?
Gary, you showed it with the picture of the hair.
Oh, okay.
H-A-R-E.
Okay.
Yeah.
So.
Looked like a black figure in water, and I've never seen that. I was just wondering where that was.
Well, if it's the picture of the hair, I'm just trying to get back to my notes and see.
Or was she asking about the picture very early in the presentation of the partially submerged person, like coming out of the sand?
Or water?
That early picture is Emmy, and one can speculate who Emmy is. But I'm trying to see if I can find that picture.
Gary, you can email me later if you want to.
That would be a great idea because we're running out of time. But Brian Bass has a question.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear Gary? Gary, can you hear Brian?
Barely.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, better.
More important than the Garavelli at the corner of Grand and Olive was what was upstairs. It was a billiard parlor for many, many, many years. It was known as Grand and Olive Billiards at one time. Then Haydad's, I don't know who Haydad was, but It was Haydaz Billiards, and some of the better players in the country, including Minnesota Fats, would come to that billiard parlor above Garavelli's to play billiards and pool, if you know the difference.
Okay. Thank you for that. I was unaware of it. I ate at Garavelli's, but I never went upstairs.
A long staircase to get upstairs, but they had at least 20 or 25 pool tables and billiard tables. If you know that billiards are the tables with no pockets.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's a good
Well,
addition.
thank you so very much. I think we are going to have to end the program right now because we are a little bit over time. And if you have any questions that you would like to share and ask Gary, you can email me, Judy Oliver. I will send you a link. This program will also was recorded and will be on our website, the Mirowitz Center website. And I want to thank you, Gary. This was very, very interesting today. And we hope that we can communicate and maybe have a different program another day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone attending.
Thank you.
Bye, Gary.
Bye-bye.